Hello, I am Samuel Ernst, and thank you for joining me for this webinar on Challenges to Selection for Digital Preservation. This webinar was prepared for the MLIS Capstone course at Valdosta State University. Selecting materials for digital preservation is an important step in the digital preservation lifecycle, and in this video, I will discuss some of the common challenges and issues to be aware of during the process of selection, regardless of the size of your organization or your level of experience dealing with digital materials. As more documents and materials are either created digitally or digitized from analog media, libraries and other cultural heritage institutions find themselves having to preserve and safeguard these items for future use. Despite how easy it may sound, selecting the materials you will digitally preserve takes a lot of forethought and planning. According to Castellec, selection is one of the limiters of digital preservation due to the time and resources needed to evaluate materials. The focus of this webinar are common areas that are troublesome or cause challenges to selection, and is geared towards information professionals in any setting who are beginning or looking to begin a digital preservation program, but are unsure how to select material for preservation. Here are the 5 areas I will discuss that affect the selection process. They are technical requirements, selection criteria, appraisal frameworks, stakeholders, and costs. This list is not exhaustive, but the most common areas discovered during my research. Likewise, the discussion of these areas is not comprehensive, but designed to give a general overview and provide a starting point for you in your own selection procedures and research. The first area I will discuss that affects selection is technical requirements. Digital items have specific requirements for storage and displaying, depending on many factors, such as file format and renderability. For example, document files, such as Word documents or PDF files, require different software to open and read them than, say, 3D models or websites. Look at your current technical infrastructure and see what your capabilities are. Ryan and Sampson observe that an institution's ability to preserve digital content can shape what it chooses to preserve. If you are going to digitize physical documents, purchasing scanning and other equipment is required. Whether you are managing born digital files or digitized copies of analog documents, storage is crucial for digital files. Ensure you have ample storage space for the files and several separate backups. It is recommended to keep at least one backup in a separate location or facility as an extra precaution. It is worth noting that many of the things mentioned in this section can be outsourced. Scanning services and cloud storage are options if you do not have the ability to scan or store the files at your location. However, outsourcing is generally expensive, and you must consider the risks to physical documents that are sent out to a third party. One of the biggest limiting factors with technical requirements is cost. Purchasing new equipment, hard drives, scanners, software, and so on can add up quickly. Knowing your budget and what technology you can afford can shape what you choose to preserve. Now on to selection criteria. Selection criteria refers to guidelines that can be applied to digital items to test their appropriateness for digital preservation, sort of like a checklist. Saving everything can get expensive, and not everything is worth saving, so having guidelines to help make those decisions is crucial. Many things go into creating selection criteria. The best place to start is with your organization's mission statement and collection development policies. These two documents will provide a lot of insights as to what types of items and subjects are relevant to your organization and community. Institutions with existing analog collections can model the selection criteria for a digital collection around the same criteria, given that the collection topics are the same. Will your digital collection be strictly born digital content or digitized material, or both? If digitizing materials, how will you select what to scan? Kastelec discusses a balanced approach to selection criteria in the thematic model. The thematic model relies on guidelines based on criteria such as format, events, or topics to help guide selection. Copyright can play an important role in selection criteria. Without being able to get permission from copyright holders or being able to prove that no copyright holders exist, digitizing materials or creating backups of digital files is legal murky water. If you do not have much time to devote to searching for copyright holders, it may be easier to only copy materials that are clearly in the public domain or are owned by or were donated to the organization. Technical requirements can also affect what types of digital files you can select. Include information such as supported file formats, metadata requirements, or storage limitations in your selection criteria. If you are planning to accept donations of digital documents, ensure that you share your selection criteria with potential donors as to the types of files you accept and the subjects relevant to the organization, along with copyright and conditional acceptance clauses. Appraisal frameworks. Appraisal frameworks are simply methods for applying the selection criteria in practice. 4 appraisal frameworks discussed by Sloan are macro, micro, functional, and bottom-up appraisal. Macro appraisal looks at whole collections and groups of files as a whole. On the other end, micro appraisal means going through and evaluating each file individually. Functional appraisal looks for the functions or workflows digital files represent. Context is important here. For example, multiple versions of a Microsoft Word document can show how the author revised their work over time. These types of things are what functional appraisal looks for. Bottom-up appraisal works by performing micro appraisal on a sample of files from a larger group. This framework is useful in cases where a large number of files have to be reviewed. Rather than looking through thousands of image files, selecting a representative sample allows you to gauge the contents of the rest of the images. Next, I will discuss the various stakeholders in the selection process and their relationships to each other, as noted by Ravenwood et al. Selection is not an isolated process that happens in a vacuum. There are many levels of staff and management that affect the process. These different stakeholders are practitioners and colleagues, IT staff, managers and senior managers, the institution, and donors. The practitioners are the ones who work closest with the files and apply selection criteria to materials. Their colleagues form an informal information network for them to draw knowledge from. Without proper training and communication between departments, practitioners can feel a sense of loss of control over the selection process, which, in their mind, complicates their jobs further. IT staff need to be included here because they play a vital role in securing and maintaining digital systems. They may not always understand the processes of the practitioners or why things are so complex, so building a harmonious relationship between these two groups can be helpful. Managers affect selection by providing training and feedback to the practitioners. Senior managers affect selection by creating and revising selection criteria, allocating funding for preservation efforts, and ensuring cooperation between all levels of preservation staff. The organization plays an overarching role in selection by the guidance of its mission statement and collection policies, collaborations with outside institutions, and working within legal requirements. Donors play a part here because what they donate, the subjects of their materials, and the file formats all determine what may be selected. Again, policies regarding donations must clearly communicate these factors to potential donors. Understanding these complex relationships can help create understanding between them and ensure a smooth workflow for your selection process. This last section will discuss a factor that has been hinted at in other sections, but affects every level of the selection and digital preservation process: costs. The amount of funds available for digital preservation will affect your technical capabilities, your hardware and software, your selection criteria, because of its relation to technical capabilities, and staff hours and training. Corrado and Sandy note these limitations by stating, because technological as well as human and financial resources are not unlimited, not every digital object can be preserved. Digital preservation is not a one-and-done solution. It is a commitment to a continuous process of preserving digital files for years and years, and in some cases, perpetuity. Digital files are much more fragile than physical documents, so staff time and effort through the years will safeguard them from damage or degradation. Technology also changes, so plan on software and hardware upgrades at some point in the future. If all of this has you confused or stressed, don't worry. There are many resources available to help guide you through this process, from technical guides to step-by-step walkthroughs for creating selection criteria and preservation policies. The Library of Congress has a great starting point for selection criteria for digitization of analog materials. Likewise, the Penn State University Libraries has a great document that helps with selection criteria for digital preservation. It discusses topics such as costs, legal requirements, and item value. The Digital Preservation Handbook, published by the Digital Preservation Coalition, is a fantastic resource that covers not only selection for preservation, but each step in the digital preservation process. Lastly, the Northeast Document Conservation Center, or NEDCC, has guides to help you create digital preservation policies, selection criteria, links to other useful resources, and a digital preservation readiness self-assessment tool. Selection requires a lot of planning and forethought, and functions as the gateway to digital preservation. Selecting what materials you will preserve has many aspects. Technical requirements and capabilities, selection criteria, appraisal frameworks, stakeholders, and costs are all factors that can limit the scope of your selection efforts. While all 5 areas were discussed separately, they are all interconnected and affect each other, which can make addressing them challenging. Despite all the challenges, selection is a vital step in the digital preservation process. Ryan and Sampson go so far to say that selecting the material your institution will steward, perhaps indefinitely, is probably the most important step in managing born digital content. Therefore, each institution must evaluate and revise their selection policies to ensure that it accounts for these factors and any unique circumstances, in addition to meeting the needs of their communities. Thank you for watching. Here are the references. And the image licenses.